Newcastle under Lyme. A familiar view from the 1960s, heading towards the church and just beyond, the heart of it all, Roseville Base. The same view again, one later in the day, traffic different, light different, but still Newcastle as we remember it. Opposite Roseville stood Deco, the old factory on Stanier Street, the A34 at one end, Stanier Street at the other, a proper working area, and the centre of our world. Outside the base, Monty, the owner, Pat Greenall, the secretary, and Andy from the garage, one of the mechanics who kept Monty's scrappers on the road. Inside the base now. And here's Alan Brinley, one of the most incompetent base operators there ever was, though not quite the worst. Jim the Whale, Mick Snow and Brian, deep in discussion about how they've just been stitched up by Mr. Brinley. Now it's Jim's turn on the base. Shift started, straight into it, and already taking abuse down the phone from a customer whose taxi hasn't turned up. Next on duty, Clinton, another regular on the base, and then Bill, Bungalow Bill, nothing upstairs. A nice enough bloke, but completely hopeless on the radio. He'd give a car a job, and a minute later have no idea where he'd sent them. Then he'd be calling for cars in the very same area again. One of his tricks was to pretend to press the mic button and threaten a driver by saying, "Get on with it, or I will rip your head off." But he hadn't actually pressed the button. He wasn't fooling anyone. Out on the road now, Ewan, Alpha 14, in Stanier Street. David tweets, Alf 20, Mr. Blobby, outside Safeway in his green Montego. Big John, waiting outside the Sutherland Arms. Jasper Alpha 3 on the wagon and horses on the Highland. Big Roy, Alpha 39, outside the coach house. A lone taxi on Woolly's Bank. Gary Crackley, Alpha 12, outside the Oxford Arms. Roy Weaver, Alpha 33, at Maryfield School, waiting for the kids. Brian, Alpha 30, outside the Cricketers' Arms, not far from home in Maybank. Diesel Dave, outside the Victoria. Harry, Alpha 6, at the Marsh Head. Les Latham, Alpha 32, wheel bearing, outside the hemp stalls. Paul, Alpha 22, known as 1.5, outside the Plough in Woolstonton. Steve, Terminator, from Chesterton, not a man you argued with. Jojo outside the Cavalier in Bradwell, Carlos Place just behind him, and back in time again. A 1960s view of Gitanas, before it was Gitanas, with an old Roseville taxi pulling in for a pickup. And here's Gary Crackley again, driving John Forrest's car, Alpha 26, outside Gitanas. Here's Mick Snow waiting outside the Victoria Theatre in Hartshill. He's been sent to the new Victoria Theatre in Basford, but like many times before, he's got it wrong. And of course, he's blaming the base operator, saying he's been sent on a dummy. Meanwhile, over at the new Victoria Theatre, there's a man waiting for his taxi. He's got a train to catch at Stoke Station, and now the car's late. Another vehicle will have to be sent, and Snowy's still moaning because he thinks he's on a dummy. Over in Hartshill, there's Phil, Alpha 31, on the Path Lab, waiting for a pickup. Just round the corner at Central Outpatients is Brian, Alpha 22, Cockney Brian, also waiting. And not far away, there's Ted outside the accident unit. Nice and early for his job, relaxing with his Mark IV Cortina. This is the road to Trent Vale and the City General. And here's where it leads, the maternity block. A Roseville Mark III Cortina picking up a mother and her new baby. Further down in Trent Vale, there's Dave Allport at the Jubilee Club. He lives locally. Over in Nutton, Frank Rigby, the Arthur Scargill of Roseville, waiting for a well-refreshed customer to stagger out of the forge. Probably Dixie, or Ivan Mayland, or some other pisshead. Gary's waiting outside the halfway house. Big John's at rest for once, waiting for workers to come out. Back to Frank again, this time at the Ape Dale in his red Renault minibus, one of the first 8-seater wheelchair-adapted vehicles in Newcastle, and actually one of the first in the country. There's Dave Hancock on Merial Street Rank, waiting for a fare. And there's Diddy at the Bush in Silverdale. He once wrote off 2 of Monty's black cabs in one weekend, one Friday night, one Sunday afternoon, and Monty still didn't sack him. And here's the man himself, Monty, owner of Roseville, outside Silverdale Colliery, waiting for the miners. There's Steve, Alpha 32, out at Shaley Brook, the Rising Sun, a favourite summer pub for Roseville drivers, closed now. Alan Fenton, the mechanic, a very good one, the man who kept Monty's cars on the road. And here's the Whale and Ratty after a night out at the Broughton Arms, a night that led to disaster for Ratty. And now there's an argument. 2 taxis have turned up for the same job, but neither driver has realised yet that the customer has phoned 2 taxis, but only requires 1. Now we move into the early 90s. There's Ratty, Mark Wyatt, driving Alpha 8 on Maryfield School with passenger assistant Pat Beardsley. And there's Ted with Barbara Hill on the Blackfriars School. Here's Joe in Kinsey Street, Silverdale, 1989, with his red Sierra estate. Rob Croton, Alpha 13, back on the base for a break. After the new owner took over at Roseville, many drivers left, myself included, and moved over to Sid's Taxis, private hire. There's Roy Weaver and 1.5 chatting outside Sid's after leaving Roseville, and I moved on to form my own company, RH Travel Limited. I was 24 in this photograph, full of dreams of running my own business one day. That was the Roseville Ford Cortina I used to drive. At the time, I just thought I'd put it on as RH Travel and see what happened. Many years later, after working at Roseville through the changes of ownership, I finally broke away and bought my own minibus. I put it on Sid's Taxis, hoping I might get a school run from Staffordshire County Council. I didn't have to wait long, and then things just snowballed. It wasn't long before I had my first run, and before I knew it, I had several runs going. I remember someone saying at Roseville that a taxi business just runs itself. It's true, all I was doing was my school run and enjoying 13 weeks off a year and no base rent. Life felt easy. In 2009, I bought another vehicle, an 8-seater wheelchair vehicle, and began tendering for even more runs. Things were going great. I had several drivers working for me, many of them ex-Roseville drivers who'd branched out on their own, but were glad of a steady school run. There was Steve Terminator from Chesterton, Ted, Ray Draper, Jojo, just to name a few. In 2016, I replaced the bus I'd had for 7 years. Work was steady and reliable, and the money kept coming in. Steve Watkins worked for me. He did the rank as well. His vehicle became my backup if anything went wrong with the others. I had David Tweets, Mr. Blobby, doing a run in an 8-seater MPV. Dave Hancock and Margaret Bradley ran another. Margaret worked for me for quite a few years. Then there was Steve and Joe, all reliable people who never let me down. We had Steve's mother-in-law Maureen helping out, and Steve Watkins would cover for Blobby when he wasn't well. Sue, who was a teacher at Maryfields, organised the transport when the children came out. When Sue finished teaching and retired, she got her private hire and passenger assistant badges and joined us driving and looking after the children too. The business probably reached its peak around 2014. But after that, things slowly began to change. A new generation of drivers and operators started taking over, many of them cutting corners, forging documents, and tendering for contracts very cheaply. Competition became tougher and tougher. At the same time, I'd been away from the taxi side of the business for nearly 10 years. So I was losing that word-of-mouth connection that had always helped keep work coming in. Most of the drivers working with me were roughly my age too, and they were all coming up to retirement. Some had to stop through ill health. By 2021, I was down to just 3 drivers, including myself. Then my main school run came to an end. I tried to get another, but with the level of competition, it just wasn't possible. So at 65, I decided it was time to retire. I stepped back and left the remaining 2 drivers carrying on. Then in 2024, one of them had to retire through ill health. And in 2025, the last driver finished for the same reason. RH Travel Limited was formally dissolved with Companies House in January 2026. From a young lad of 24 with a dream and a Ford Cortina, to building a business with loyal drivers and good people around me, it had been quite a journey, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. Here are some of the old shops, pubs and places in Newcastle under Lyme, from the days before the council and the big supermarket chains changed everything, when independent traders could still make a proper living. First, there was Brassington's, then the fishmongers, J. Stone and Dunn's Pet Store, all proper family-run businesses where everyone knew your name. Shaw's Chip Shop, where Jim the Whale once worked. And of course Woolworths, where everyone went at some point in the week. Then there was the famous sunken roundabout. Look how busy the town was back then, full of shoppers, traffic and life. Just look at the difference today, full of homeless people and drug addicts. Here's the old cattle market, where Morrison's now stands, the Sutherland Arms, reminders of Newcastle's past. Burgess's Bakery, the Boozy Dog in the Iron Market, the Wine Vaults, a great 80s pub, Radio Rentals just next door but one, Worthington's, a brilliant independent electrical retailer. Shops like that slowly disappeared as the big chains moved in, Maplin's, Curry's and the rest. And of course, Newcastle Council with the extortionate high rental charges. Here's Sim O outside the Smithfield, which has now been knocked down. This is where the farmers would have come on cattle market day while their wives were shopping around the town. This is a shot from the top of the Iron Market looking down the high street with the Globe Cafe, Hayden's and Tesco on the left. This next one is a bit closer to the camera. Greenwood's men's shop on the left and Mallard's nearby. This was just in front of the Guildhall in the 1960s. Here's another scene, probably taken in the 1970s, on a busy market day. Something that sadly doesn't exist in Newcastle anymore. And this is Bridge Street in Newcastle. Just above where the car is parked was the old express taxi base, where I first started working in Newcastle as a private hire driver. Here's Rumour's Restaurant, opened in 1981. It became a very successful business run by Gary and Beth, Kerry and Jan. And here's a look inside. Back to the Iron Market in the 1960s. This is looking the opposite way across the market. And we finish with Pools Coaches, based at Alsager's Bank, a well-known local operator that no longer exists, lost to fierce competition and changing times. And now there's talk of Stoke Council, Newcastle Council and Staffordshire Moorlands all merging together. Just look at the mess already they have made of Hanley, and the mess made of Newcastle Town Centre. Put those two together and it's a recipe for an even bigger disaster and an even bigger waste of money. Newcastle under Lyme had busy streets, independent shops, and a town full of life. Today, most of it has gone, replaced by empty units, high rents, and bad decisions. For those of us who remember it properly, it's not just change, it's loss. Once a town loses its heart, it never truly gets it back.